to Sagas Sass Season 2. I'm Tara, currently along with fellow host Jonathan. We've lost Nami. We're not sure where she is. Maybe she'll join us later, hopefully. But for now, welcome to Sagas Sass Season 2. I'm Tara with my fellow host Jonathan. This episode will cover Tongues of Serpents, Book 6 of the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik.
If you're watching live, join us in the chat, or after the fact, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Sagas and Sass to continue the conversation.
And just as a reminder, the views expressed in this show are those of the hosts as individuals and do not necessarily represent the show as a whole. Okay, so when Tongues of Serpents opens, Lawrence Temeraire and company are already in Australia following a not-so-fun but at least uneventful journey. Thankfully, we were spared any lengthy descriptions of that, and the book kicks off with a bang, pow, kerplunch, as Lawrence, Granby, and Tharke basically immediately get into a bar fight because this whole series has become Everybody Hates Lawrence. We soon find out that a brief stop toward the end of their voyage led to the Allegiance picking up William Bligh, who was the governor of the colony until he was deposed in a military coup, and is super set on Lawrence, with the help of Temeraire, of course, restoring him to his position. On the other hand, we have Colonel John MacArthur, who orchestrated the rebellion and kind of just wants Lawrence to stay out of it while they wait for a decision from the powers that be in London. You'd think that was enough nonsense for our fated pair, but of course there has to be more. Not long after they arrive, Captain Rankin, yes, that Rankin, shows up to claim one of the eggs from the Allegiance and take command of the Australia covert they mean to establish. Of course, Temeraire wants no part of this and even attempts to talk to the Dragonet, which is the child of the Turkish pharaohs Arkady and Rinj, in its egg, and convince it to reject Rankin. In a weird twist of events, or maybe not, considering how Iskirka turned out after Temeraire talked to her while she was in her egg, when the Dragonet hatches, he accepts Rankin because, well, he's rich. Though he does choose his own name, that being, wait for it, Caesar. Yes, after that Caesar. And Caesar is greedy, and Rankin is his usual wannabe superior self, so we suppose they deserve each other in the end. Soon MacArthur requests that the aviators and their dragons head out on an expedition to find a pass from Sydney through the mountains. And because Lawrence wants to stay out of local politics and wants to keep Rankin out of them as well, they head out. But in true Temeraire series fashion, this is no simple expedition, as they take with them a group of prisoners meant to help them carve out a path, Tharke, who wants to track down a smuggling ring operating out of China, and both of the remaining dragon eggs. Unfortunately, they're already having a shit ton of difficulty finding any sort of way through the mountains when the real trouble begins. The Yellow Reaper egg is stolen by Aborigines who lead the expedition on a frantic chase across the whole dang continent, a chase that is punctuated by the dangers of the Australian desert, firestorms, actual storms, and apparently not so mythical bunyips who create water holes as bait and snatch people away in the night, and eventually even divert the water to create quicksand traps for Temeraire.
To make matters worse, when the remaining egg does finally hatch, the Dragonet, an experimental cross between a Parnassian and a checkered nettle, is a sickly runt who can't even fly. Rankin wants to give it a quick and humane ending, which Lawrence disagrees with, though in another slightly surprising turn, Temeraire actually doesn't. Thankfully, Domain steps up to claim the dragon, naming him Cullingile, and promising to care for it himself, which he does to the best of his ability. Though Cullingile eats like a horse, or like a dragon, and grows at a tremendous rate, eventually developing the buoyant sacs that allow dragons to fly. While Cullingile can only sort of float along at first, and wow, picturing that is hilarious, little treat. Dorset, the dragon surgeon, explains that only the heaviest of heavyweights ever exhibit negative total body weight this way. To say Domain was rewarded for saving Cullingile is an understatement, though the announcement that the dragon will be on the Maximus Excidium level causes its own problems, as now the officers who dismissed him at first start trying to, steal him from Domain.
Oh, real quick, I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Caligulae.
Okay, of course.
Yes.
Of course, Caligulae is best. He's a big behemoth too, or behemoth. Is best big little boy and refuses, though granted this will probably cause more problems in the future because of racism and shit, but for now Domain and his dragon are safe and together. And it's probably not going to turn out well for anyone who tries to separate them. After what seems like far too long, seriously, why with the unnecessary long travelogues in this series, the British finally catch up with the egg thieves. But by the time they arrive on the northern coast, thus discovering the source of the smuggling ring, a port operated jointly by the Larakia people? No, Larakia people? How would you pronounce that? I'm not even sure.
I think it's Larakia or Larakia.
Larakia.
Yeah.
The Larakia people and the Chinese. The egg has hatched. The dragon has named herself Tharunka, and she has bonded with the Larakia and refuses the British offer to join them instead. Despite this development, though, things seem to be going swimmingly for a bit. Tharunka and Temeraire work together. To establish diplomatic ties between their people. And of course, the Chinese immediately fawn over Temeraire and Lawrence. But it's not all well. I keep raising too much on the. But it's not all well that ends well yet, of course. A British ship arrives with orders to seize the port, and the ensuing fight is, well, quite a mess. It turns out the smugglers had essentially trained Sea Serpents to transport goods from China to Australia, but when the British ship starts mounting its attack, all it takes is Tharunka dumping some fish guts all over the ship for the Serpents to go after it. While Tharunka does end up helping Temeraire, Caesar, Iskirka, and Colangile carry some of the sailors to safety, obviously the British are no longer welcome there and have to head back to Sydney, which they reach just in time to find that the governor's replacement has arrived from England and is already planning to fight the Chinese for control of the smuggling port. But this just leads to another rebellion. MacArthur is put back in charge. Skirka receives orders to head off to Brazil to counter Napoleon's plans there, and Lawrence and Temeraire decide to seek a quiet retirement in the Australian countryside. Not that we really believe that this will last long.
Yeah, sorry. That was a lot. Usually, like, we have, a couple other people to split this with. Yeah, so I don't know what's going on with Navi. I don't know if she's gonna join us, but I guess I hope so, because I really wanted to hear her input on the new dragons that we met. But so yeah, we got a bunch more different kinds of dragons. Caesar is kind of, we don't really know what he is, right? Like, they don't know what breeds Arcady and Ringe are. They're
he's just he's the children of two mutt dragons, and he's a mutt himself. So
yeah. Mutts on mutts on mutts. And I mean, he's I guess he's gonna be like a middleweight, probably. I mean, he's definitely better, quote unquote, better, for lack of a better word, than what Rankin. He's better in Rankin's mind than his previous dragon, who was just a messenger dragon, I suppose, because this one can actually fight. Yeah. Although I don't know, we learned in the last book that even the little ones can fight if they really want to. But yeah, I mean, the fact that this dragon, who was born of two wild dragons and also got a talking to, or 10 from Temeraire while he was in the egg, actually just hatched and immediately was like, yeah, no, I'm totally cool with this guy and obeying him because
money.
He's rich. Yeah, like wow, dude. Like, I guess that might have been. I read this book weeks ago. I finished reading it weeks ago, so I could be wrong, but maybe it was like, I'm wondering if I miss not remembering that Iskirka might have had something to do with that. Like, she might have been.
Yeah, also talking to the egg.
Yeah, or he was just in the egg overhearing all of their conversations, and like Iskirka constantly like bragging about being rich and Granby and being rich and taking prizes and everything. So he came out of the egg just really appreciating
the finer things in life.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, Rankin immediately started like feeding him the like most expensive thing he could find in Australia, which is, I believe, sheep. So that was like, it's. I don't think that what Lawrence said to Rankin back in book 1 really changed, anything about who Rankin is as a person, but maybe he did learn a little bit of a lesson, because or at the very least, he's just been so long without, because I think that's something Lawrence thinks about, is like, oh, well, he's been so long without a dragon. Maybe he's just finally so grateful to have one again. But I mean, let's be real, like throughout the whole book, he doesn't stop taking care of Caesar. And part of me wonders if he did, whether Caesar would actually kind of be like, hey man, what's up? Like, what the fuck? You know?
I suspect so. I mean, Lawrence did mention the reason he thinks Rankin's better towards him is because there's no society for him to hang out in. So it's like there's nothing better to do. That was mentioned by Lawrence.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, he's treating him better, but is he only doing that because there's absolutely nothing to do in this godforsaken place?
Yeah, I'm sure there's like a million, maybe not a million. There's definitely a bunch of reasons why things are good for, Caesar right now. And to be honest, like, he's annoying. Which is so funny because like Iskirka is terrible a lot of the time, but like I still love her, whereas Caesar is terrible and I don't like him. And it's like, is it because he's obedient to like a character I don't like, or because he's, I don't know. How do you feel? Like, how do you feel about like Caesar versus Iskirka? Do you have a preference?
Well, Iskirka is an out of control lunatic, and Caesar's just still not grown up yet. I mean, Iskirka's a young dragon, but she's now been years, right? She's not right out of just hatched, and she's still an out of control lunatic. But Caesar's just out of the egg, so it's too early to say what he'll be. I mean, Temeraire has changed over the course of these books in his behavior, and he's evolved. So, he hasn't evolved like the 100 and 200-year-old dragons we meet later in the series or earlier in the series, depending on which books it is. But
although, to be honest, like we don't really know how much they evolved. Maybe they have recently just because of Temeraire's influence on things, but we don't really know how much like Excidium has evolved, because it's I mean, I'm sure he has a little bit, but they had their dragons hatch, and this is what happens from like moment to moment after they hatch. Like they had their
Excidium's not that old either, right? I mean, Excidium's still on his first captain.
Is she his first? I honestly don't remember.
I mean, that was my assumption, because I mean, and Excidium's a long wing, right?
He must be, yeah.
Yeah, because it's I mean, it doesn't have to be a woman, but
No, he's a heavyweight, I think.
Yeah, but aren't long wings heavyweights? Aren't they the smallish heavyweights?
They might be, yeah. I'm looking it up now because I'm really mad.
Side of the heavyweights.
Yes, he is a long wing. Okay, yeah. I think he might be. Yeah, they're on the smaller side, and I think they might be considered heavyweights, where if they didn't have the acid spitting, they might not be considered heavyweights. Like I think the heavyweight term with them is less about how big they are and more about the fact that they are the only, prior to Iskirka, they were the only dragons in Britain who had prior to Iskirka and Temeraire, I guess they were right, exactly. So yeah, I figure it's like I had to look that up because like I feel like we've been. They've used that term heavyweight so much, and it's almost always applied to like dragons like Maximus, that I forget that long wings, who they aren't super small, but they aren't really, really big. They certainly aren't like Maximus size either. I forget like that they're just considered heavyweights because they're special, which is fine, Oh, there go my dogs. Hold on. Stop barking. No. Sorry. I don't know what they're barking at this time, but
yeah. I mean, I must admit, of all the books of this series, this was my least favorite.
Really?
Yeah, I just thought it went on and on and on and on as they ran through one random monster encounter to another in the outback.
I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, honestly, Naomi Novik brought back that lengthy, unnecessary travelogue with a vengeance in this book. It is not my least favorite of the series. I liked a lot of what happened outside of their little travelogue. But it is, I mean, and I think there were a lot of really great revelations and like different things happening at the beginning and at the end. You know what I mean? Like Caesar, surprising us by hatching and being what he was. Everything with Caligula, who hatched and they wanted to, put him down because they thought he was useless as dragons go. And like, it's like, as soon as that happened, I was like, he ain't going to be useless. Like I knew it, but it was still nice to see that like Domain like got his, just rewards there in the best way possible. The fact that Thrunka, the Aborigines stole the egg and had it for so long. And then she hatched and she was just like, yeah, these are my people now. Like they talked to me while I was in the shell and they told me when I hatched what they wanted me to do. And like, I don't want to leave. But yeah, the travel log was just, it was a lot in this one. I still prefer Tongues of Serpents over any of the first 3 books. I would say it's probably on par with Throne of Jade, book 2, where they go to China. But I mean, I didn't like their little sea journey travelogue in that one. So I don't know. Do you? I know we've talked about this before when it comes to these books, but do you agree with me that I feel like a lot of it, like I know Nami has said she thinks it's just this is Naomi Novik's style, maybe, or it was her style with this series, but I really think that these travelogue things, they get so bogged down that it feels to me like they're just like all of these books are basically the exact same length, and it feels like she includes these travelogues as needed to fill pages.
That could be.
I mean, I guess there's no way of knowing for sure.
I mean, some people like these endless travelogue stories. I mean, I'm much more a plot-driven person in my books. Plot and dialogue are what do it for me. Mm-hmm. Descriptions of countryside is not necessary to me, and again, random encounters that don't really move the plot forward don't really do it for me either.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I like, to an extent, the flowery descriptions and the, where you're, it's, I don't know, like Martin, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of like, that's not flowery with him really, but there's a lot of that like kind of extraneous, descriptors of like the surrounding areas and stuff in his books. But with his books, it just feels like world building. Whereas with these, like I said, it's just a travel log. And
I mean, part of that might be because it's a real world versus a fantasy world. We're more interested in learning about the world building of Martin than we are of knowing what Australia looks like in the 1800s, because we already know what Australia looked like in the 1800s, or at least I already know what Australia looks like in the 1800s. I've been to Australia. I know what Australia looks like.
But also, I mean, like, I mean, and Tolkien does it too, but like, I think it's less that it's a fantasy world, because let's be real, like, especially Martin, like, there's not that much magical about the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. Like in the first, like when we're traveling through Westeros, you know what I mean? It gets a little bit, things are a little bit different when, we get into the later books and everything, but like, I think it's less that it's a fantasy world, but more that he does a really good job. And Tolkien does too, for the most part, of punctuating the, sort of descriptors of the world, that sort of, that type of world building. They do a good job of punctuating it with, I mean, and shoot, so did, N.K. Jemisin in the Broken Earth trilogy of punctuating it with plot and dialogue. And I just like, with these books, and honestly, I agree with you. Like this one was it. Yeah,
There were painful parts.
the bunyips thing was crazy to me, and that was something I wanted to talk about because like I really thought that they were just crocodiles. Like this was the Temeraire, like the world with dragons version of crocodiles, that they are sentient and they work together and stuff like that. But then I looked it up, and they're actually a thing. They're like, I mean, they're a mythological creature
in Aboriginal mythology. Yeah,
right, exactly. I think like the definition or the current the word is translated by like Aboriginal Australians today as devil or evil spirit. And you know, but yeah, they lurk in like swamps and billabongs and creeks and riverbeds and water holes. And so I mean, Naomi Novik might have taken the little bit of mythology she knew or could find about these and, you know, expounded upon it.
Yeah, I mean, I just assumed that these were essentially the local dragon species.
Yeah. Yeah, which I guess yeah, that's what they are.
That's
really
how I interpreted it. But they're a ground-bound dragon species.
Yeah. I guess more like
or an underground dragon, you know.
Yeah, and if you look up like the pictures of them online are
I haven't done that.
Yeah, they there's a lot of different versions of what they look like, but they usually have hair. Some of them look almost like saber-toothed tiger type animals. Some of them are a lot more like skeletal, like it looks like almost like a crocodile head with like ears and like this like weird skeletal body. Like some of them have looked like just walruses with like canine fangs. I mean, but no matter what, none of them look like I felt they were described in this book, especially the ones that are like hairy.
Well, here's one that sort of looks like a dinosaur.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's more. They're more like dinosaurs than dragons because, like you said, they're ground bound. But yeah, I just assumed that they were like crocodiles, but they were this world's version of crocodiles. So finding out that they're actually like a mythological creature, I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. I wish that the pictures I'd seen, you know, did justice to like the way they are in the book, but
yeah, I didn't even think about it. I just read.
Yeah, well, when they first started mentioning them and like the people were just being snatched away from the water hole at night, that's when I was like, okay, they're crocodiles, right? They're just crocodiles, like snatching people away, and they've got this weird name for them, like the Aboriginal, peoples, like they call them bunyips, but they're just crocodiles. So yeah, it was a very, I went down a little bit of like a rabbit hole, Googling them and reading about them and stuff. So it was an interesting experience. Hey, thank you, Naomi Novik. This book like taught me something about Australia. I had no idea existed. But yeah, I mean the fact that they created like the quicksand trap, and then afterward they were like, Lawrence and them were like, well, let's see if we can just like make them an offering. And they did, right? And yeah. they just kept making them offerings, and they basically got left alone. I mean, so they aren't entirely evil, I guess. Like they'll back off if you give them something better to do. But yeah, so yeah, I don't know. The travelogue stuff in this was just plotting.
Was long and not nearly as funny as Bill Bryson.
I mean, it really wasn't. It wasn't interesting. Real, like it's like they kept, Naomi Novik kept throwing, like, the bunyips were one thing, and then the firestorm was, happened, and then the actual, like, well, maybe it was the thunderstorm first and the firestorm second. I
Well, the
can't remember.
thunderstorm was caused the firestorm.
Okay, that's what it was. Yeah. So, but this, like, these extremes of weather, and I don't. I'm assuming that these are based on real things, obviously, that happen in Australia. I've never really looked into Australia's weather patterns, but I know it gets very, very hot down there. It just felt like, like I said, man, it's filler pages. There was no reason we needed this to be that long. Just describing them, trekking across the continent. And then, especially when it was punctuated at either end by so much happening, it just felt like, when they were in the jungle, or the forest, whatever, trying to find the mountain pass. I was like, so this is the travel log bit, and it's going to get better soon, right? And no, it just got worse.
Yeah. The one thing I did not understand at all, again, from someone who's actually been to Australia, is how, when you have essentially air power, they had any trouble finding the Aborigines from the air when they were going through the outback. I understand if they were still in the Blue Mountains, which is the mountain chain that they were trying to get across.
Right.
Why that would be difficult. But once they were in the outback, there's nothing there. It's a desert. There's nowhere to hide, really. I mean, they could have hidden from them. Eventually, they would have been spotted.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reasoning was, and I don't disagree with you that it was like, oh, come on. I think the reasoning was that the people that stole the egg just got so far ahead of them at some point that, and of course they could only stray so far off of what they assumed was the beaten path.
Yeah, I mean, the Aborigines are known to be able to just, like, go and hide into the rocks when they're on the ground, and hide from other people on the ground. But again, once you can get airborne, I just don't see it being feasible.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot. Well, and then they get to the rock formation, which was it. The one I'm thinking of, was it Alice Rock that they were talking about, where they saw
Uluru. They were Uluru, which was known as Ayers Rock.
Ayers Rock,
by the British, but it's Uluru is the Aboriginal name for it, and that's what they now use again. So.
Yeah, and that's when they finally catch up with them, only to see, I think her name is Shenli, the the new breed of Chinese dragon, like, take off, and she's so fast and can fly for so long, and it's like, obviously this makes sense, and I think it came up in terms of how they're getting messages back and forth from China, to this port quickly and everything, or able to do it at all, really. But at the same time, it's like, I really hope this comes up again soonish, because otherwise, if it was just like this, like, point of plot convenience in this particular book, so that they would catch up to the Aborigines, but just in time to, like, basically lose the race to this, dragon who can fly faster and farther than any dragon that's ever existed before. It's just very plot convenience type thing. And then it turns out that she, as dragons go, Temeraire is kind of like, she's not even interesting. Like, she doesn't have, like, know how to hold a conversation. Like, this poor new dragon. I really want to know more about how they bred her, honestly. Like, what led to Shenli? Because they don't really describe that. They say that they were doing all these experiments, and she was one of very few who actually, like, came out of it and was able to be, utilized the way they utilize her. But they're very vague for a series that for Novik is very vague about how she came to be for a series that has gone,
You're talking about the long range dragon.
Yeah. Like she was just way more vague about her like existence and how she came to be and what sort of dragons they bred to get to this point than she usually is, I guess. I mean, listen, we just got this thorough description of what comes out of a Parnassian and a whatever the other one, Cornish spike hen or whatever. I don't remember.
Well, but I mean, in this case, though, she's followed given us a number of different breeds of European breeds and mentioned them over and over and over again. Other than Imperials and Celestials, we don't really know much about Chinese dragons at all. So these about what the breeds are. So would it mean anything to us at this point anyway? If she did.
Maybe. Well, I mean, I don't know. We know about all the main ones that they use, I guess. I don't know. It was mostly just like this was a dragon that didn't, we're basically told didn't exist until very recently.
Right.
And like she's already grown and able to do this stuff. And it's like, okay, but how?
Well, but Temeraire grew really fast too. I mean, these dragons go. I mean, obviously it's for plot convenience, but as far as I can tell, these dragons grow way too fast and don't eat nearly enough. I mean, based on the size that they're described at, I think they would have to eat even more than they're eating.
Yeah, you're probably not wrong there. Like they talk about how many like cattle or whatever Temeraire eats in a day, and it's like, I don't know, it's like 1 if it's a bad day, like 2 if it's a good day. That doesn't seem like enough when he's supposed to be as big as he is. But I mean, well, and then you've got like Caligula, who is like just constantly starving, and they're feeding and feeding and feeding him. But what they're feeding him is like, Domain is doing his best, but what he's feeding him is like scrawny ass kangaroos and like the bird or whatever that they keep catching and stuff like that. It's like, how can he fatten up at all?
Well, maybe I'm wrong. I'm actually looking at the size of killer whales and how much food they eat in a day. And they eat about 375 pounds of food a day.
Okay.
So, and a killer whale, I think, is about, gets as big as 10 tons, but more often less. But.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but I guess maybe it I don't know. Well, when they were feeding Temeraire fish at sea, and they're talking about these tunnies that they keep catching, and like I don't even know what the heck kind of a fish that is, or if it actually I guess it exists, but I looked it up at one point, and like basically they it's like a tuna.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Tuna is about 500 pounds. It can get as big as 500.
Okay,
pounds.
so maybe this is this is the early 1800s when the waters weren't just fished to death and everything. I suppose. Yeah. I suppose I'll give them that. But yeah,
cows are about 1,200 pounds each.
Right.
I'm just looking at this. Blue whales eat 2,000 to 9,000 pounds of plankton a day.
Oh my god, that's so much plankton.
So
how is there still that much plankton in the world, honestly?
So if based on that, you figure these dragons have to eat, on average 3 cows a day, 2 cows a day.
Yeah. So that's not completely off from what they actually do eat. I mean, shoot, when Caesar is born, he's being fed whole sheep. But so yeah, so we get all these new dragons. We get Caesar the Mutt, and who actually turns out to be like, I'm just gonna follow my jerk Captain Rankin and his dumb rules. And then we get Caligula, who is this spiny, weird dragon who's gonna be so big. I mean, the way Dorset describes it, he's gonna be like regal copper size or maybe larger.
Bigger, yeah.
Yeah.
But right now he was acting sort of as a helium balloon.
Mm-hmm.
Once he got his air sacs, he couldn't control his buoyancy.
I definitely chuckled out loud at that a few times when they were talking about how he just like floats along, and I'm like thinking of like a little kid with a balloon, you know, like at a theme park, and the balloon is just shaped like this weird dragon, and it's like
yeah, exactly.
And it was only like a few times that it was really like described, but every single time I got a really good chuckle out of it. So I'll that at least gave me that little extra punctuation to this long ass fucking travel log of a book. Well, here's a question. How did you feel, or what did you think about the like political stuff that happened at the beginning and the end? Now, I do want to come back at the very end of this.
They based this on real history.
Right, of course.
Captain Bligh was sent to Australia after the Bounty mutiny years later, and was known as a disciplinarian who got overthrown basically by the local populace. So that all was consistent. Obviously, you've just thrown in dragons into the mix. I did find it. I think it was Granby. He was like, "Well, this is like the fourth mutiny on the guy. I don't think he can, the population is completely blameless here as far as mutinying. They might have a reason."
Yeah. And also, they send in the new guy at the end, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Yeah, and they got rid of him very fast too.
Right, and is that so? That
also happened. Yeah.
Okay, it did, because I knew that there'd been all that unrest and like someone getting overthrown a bunch of times, but I thought it was like the same guy, and eventually they just gave up. I didn't realize like they sent someone new in, and they're not locals, they're still British. They're still, like MacArthur says, like we're still loyal to the king. We're just going to govern ourselves because we're literally on the other side. It takes us 8 months to receive word from London about anything. So legit complaint there, honestly. But yeah, so like I knew that it was obviously like based on real history, at least to an extent. I wasn't quite sure about, the thing at the end. But I guess I don't have any idea. I didn't look up really anything about MacArthur or Bligh as people. So, just when Lawrence goes to visit like the MacArthur's, home, and he's saying like these are like kind of like real people, like down to earth, like good people. It's I don't know. It was very interesting, I guess, to see what I only know of as sort of a brief description. I've never really had any reason to look deeply into Australian history, but like this brief description of what happened over there. But like imagine if in these books, they hadn't gone on this expedition, and instead it had just been like this fight between like Rankin and Caesar and Bligh versus like MacArthur and Lawrence and Temeraire. Like I almost think I rather would have preferred that. Although I liked that they got to the ports, the new secret port, and like got to see like the smuggling stuff at the end. Like, God, that whole I just feel like there could have been so much more done with this story and their time, at least the beginning of their time in Australia.
I think they could have done more with the politics of it.
To me,
that would have been more interesting than the travel log, but
for sure. I mean, absolutely.
And Tharky, I don't quite understand. I still haven't figured out why Tharky was so quiet on what his real reasons for being there were. At least to Lawrence. I mean, I understand why he wouldn't tell Bligh or MacArthur or even Rankin, but he'd been around Lawrence enough that it seems like that was just not helping the situation.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess that's kind of how he's always been. It was in character for him to be just sort of doing his own thing, and a little bit or a lot a lot of the time secretive about it. It wasn't out of character for him, so I'll give them that. But yeah, it just did seem very silly that it's like he waited as long as he did to be like, yeah, no, I'm here for the smuggling thing, BT dubs. Because especially after, they're just stuck in the mountains for so long, and I don't know. Like I said, I really, really hoped that when they were stuck in the mountains, that was like the worst we were going to have to deal with in terms of just filler. But no, somehow that was the least of it.
I mean, the political going further once they get and find the smugglers and realize that it's actually a Chinese essentially colony that is in trading post that's up in Darwin. Mm-hmm. Or what becomes Darwin in the real world. The fact that they were using the trained sea serpents was interesting, because that, quite honestly, totally changes the military and political ramifications of sea power.
Yeah, although...
I mean, if you have trained sea serpents and you have lots of them, it's now, even if they're somewhat feral, but they're trained enough to go after certain things. Just dumping fish guts on a ship and having them attack whatever ship they want to attack is not good.
Yeah.
In mass, I mean, there's just no defense against that.
Yeah, well, it's a really, and that, yeah, I definitely wanted to get into that, because it's a really weird, it's like, okay, this is a really cool thing that they did, that they were able to, because the sea serpents, they're intelligent to a point, you know what I mean? They don't speak, they're still wild animals. There are no dragons, there are no bunyips even. But, they were able to, over time, and I mean, they talked about, how it was difficult, and if something goes, like, they still lose
stuff,
they lose shipments, they, not just the leaks or whatever, that they just wander
lose shipments,
off.
but you lose shipments with regular ships too. I mean, this
exactly.
is not.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. What I mean is just like they've got a really good thing going, but it really all goes to shit, because if because the sea serpents are, sorry, my dogs were going off again. The sea serpents, like I said, they are basically just wild animals, and like very lightly trained wild animals, and losing a little bit of shipment here and there is one thing, but when they talked about the time it took to like get this many trained and stuff like that, and then they use the fish guts, to like get them to attack the British ship in the end, the one that's coming after the port. But in that fight, they see a bunch of them die. The ones that don't die, I don't think they can count on them just coming back to do their job, quote unquote job, real easily. Like, they're going to have to probably start almost from scratch, if not entirely from scratch, in this endeavor. So it's like, it's good when it's easy and going well, but the moment they actually have like a fight on their hands and that's their only line of defense, it kind of collapses their whole system, at least for a while. I'm sure they'll, I mean, we see that they already had other serpents trained, and they're already like going like all the way towards Sydney,
right,
at the very end of the book. But it's still, it's a very, very imperfect system,
but
to say the least.
Yes, but they were also at Sydney, and they were also implying it was a potential threat to the Allegiant and the others. They were worried about another attack.
I mean, it is a potential threat if they're threatening them, I guess. I mean, it seems to me that they don't, It's a potential threat if the people who are doing the smuggling are being threatened, for sure, because they will just throw their whole, like, that part of their operation away, essentially. And like, they will do that if they have to, which I get. But at the same time, like, it's only a threat if they're being attacked, because of the fact that if they do have to fight back, they are, losing a whole bunch of their sea serpents. They're losing their ships, essentially. So yeah, it was very interesting. It was very interesting, the description of how they were smuggling the goods. And I like that they went there. I like that they brought the sea serpents back as something other than just a random threat to ships on the seas.
Right.
I and honestly, like, they're not really doing anything bad. They aren't, like, all they're doing is, like, subverting the stupid, obnoxious British, like, taxes, which I can't really blame anybody for.
Not exactly. I mean, it depends on what in theory, the British government has an agreement with the Chinese government to give a monopoly to these companies. In theory. So while these Chinese smugglers are operating, it seems clear that they're operating with the permission of the Chinese government. So the Chinese government is really not being honest with the British from that perspective. Now, the Chinese, going back to the gunboat diplomacy of the British and the Chinese at the time, it was sort of forced upon the Chinese to accept these terms in the real world, but I can't imagine that would actually be true in this world when the Chinese have dragons out the wazoo. So it's
and then again, like, we see that the Chinese are, sort of, I mean, they're doing all these experiments. They're creating these, they already have all this dragon power. And I honestly haven't looked up anything about the last 3 books in the series. I don't even know what they're called off the top of my head, but I imagine that
you haven't read them yet, I take it?
No. I'm since we're not covering the last 3 books of the Temeraire series until starting in, like, November.
Yeah, I jumped the gun and started to read the next one. I finished the next one, actually.
But I haven't really looked into anything about them. Of course, we know at the end of this book, Esquerca is being sent to Brazil, because that's something that comes up only, like, briefly. It's a tell not show situation where they're saying, that Napoleon has aligned with the African tribe from Empire of Ivory. I can't remember what they're called, but the Napoleon is aligned with them.
Juarez, I think.
Yeah, they came across the Mediterranean. Napoleon aligned with them. They did a bunch of attacks on the Spanish, and then he sent them all over to Brazil, I guess on his dime, to go, and
after the Portuguese.
Right. Well, to go after the Portuguese, but also to try to find their
people,
who are probably mostly, like, gone at this point, as is described in this book. But they're decimating.
It also gets them away from potentially bothering Napoleon in Europe.
Right, of course. And they're so Esquerca is being sent to Brazil to deal with this situation at the end of Tongues of Serpents. And Lawrence and Temeraire are they found toward the beginning of this book, right before, I think it was right before the egg was stolen, maybe, they found this little valley, and they had the cute little moment, where Lawrence is like, it would be nice to build for once instead of tear away. And Temeraire wants to build Lawrence a magnificent pavilion to console him.
Yeah, I mean, they were going to basically become ranchers.
Yeah, and that's how this book ends. The very end is, Lawrence telling Temeraire that, there's an ugly character to like what we've been forced to do, or what's the work that has been found for us, is what he says. But, like, there's the things they've been doing are bad. And, Lawrence and Temeraire, mostly because of Temeraire, Lawrence is constantly trying everybody's patience, like all the people who are trying, who are above him. And, he says he's sick of the quarrels of nations and kings, and if Temeraire is content with staying in their valley, then Lawrence would be content there too. Now, of course, I don't at all believe that is going to happen for good at all. Otherwise, there would not be 3 more books in this series. But, Esquerca's off to Brazil. They've got their valley in Australia. And, I guess like if you were tired of this series and you were going to stop reading it, this would probably be a good place to do it, only because then you could tell yourself that maybe Lawrence and Temeraire really did just settle in Australia and like live in their valley and have a lovely old time of it. But, at the same time, there's still Napoleon, and there's still, it's like what is it now? 1809, probably.
Something like that.
And so the War of 1812 is coming up real quick. And I do believe there's a book, one of the last 3 books in the series is titled something, and I haven't looked anything up, and don't spoil me if it is, but one of the last 3 books in the series is titled something where like, they're going to America. Well, they've
gone everywhere else around the world, so.
But I mean, after the Australian travelogue that this book is, that makes up like 40% of this book, if you were really tired of the Temeraire series, I think you could end it here and be okay with that, honestly. But oh gosh, there was something. What was the other thing I was going to say?
Well, no, you can't, because the war is not over yet.
True. I mean, I guess, but we do all know what happens to Napoleon.
No, we know what happens in our world. We don't know what happens in this world.
True. Now, well, and also, I guess, like, honestly, like Lawrence and Temeraire could really just live out their lives in Australia, and the rest of the series, despite it being called the Temeraire series, like, there's still, Domain and Caligula, Esquerca and Granby. There's definitely a lot of. I guess, to be honest, despite it being called the Temeraire series, I feel like it would be very easy to only to expand, or to maybe only sort of briefly revisit Temeraire and Lawrence. I don't think that's actually going to happen, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really have that much else to say about this book.
No, I'm pretty good with it.
Like, I know you said it was your least favorite of the series so far.
Yes. And I have read further, and the next book is much better.
Well, that's good to know. Like I said, I did not like it as much as I liked Empire of Ivory or Victory of Eagles. I would put it on par with Throne of Jade, where they go to China. I liked it better than I liked the first and third book, whose names I can't even remember. That's how little I cared about them. Wait, they're right behind me. Black Powder War and His Majesty's Dragon being the first one, Black Powder War being the third one. But yeah, the travelogue stuff, just stop it with the filler. All these books don't need to be exactly 320 pages or whatever they are. I would have taken this book with this book would have been easier to swallow with a much shorter version of their trek throughout Australia. Fair
enough. I agree with you.
All right. Well, on that note, we are actually taking a nice long break because I and Nami as well will be at Dragon Con over Labor Day weekend. Thankfully, they did institute you have to be vaccinated or have a very recent negative COVID test. So I'm a little bit more excited about it than I was. So both Nami and I will be at Dragon Con Labor Day weekend, and we are doing a panel on Grishaverse / Shadow and Bone, Saturday, September 4th at 1 p.m. It's in Marriott. The room number is L401 to 403. It's the lobby level of the Marriott. So if anybody who's going to Dragon Con listens to this and is a Grishaverse or Shadow and Bone fan, highly suggest you check out the panel. I would say get there early because, of course, the rooms are only going to be, I think, at 2/3 capacity. But yeah, so our next webcast is actually almost a month from now. It's not until Wednesday, September 22nd. And on that date, we'll be starting with the Daevabad trilogy. So for that Wednesday, September 22nd and through October, we'll be covering the Daevabad trilogy, and we don't come back to Temeraire, like I mentioned earlier, until November. But that's fine because I'm really excited. I'm really excited to read Daevabad, honestly. Like, that's going to be my airplane and travel book next week. So yay.
And I'm ahead of that. I got to go reread David. I read the first book and I read 2/3 of the second book. And then honestly, we started doing this podcast, so I had to stop reading.
I mean, I get that. I've been putting off some reads and rereads because of this. Not that I regret it at all. But yeah, so Daevabad is next, and that'll take us through like the end of September through October. And once again, I'm Tara along with Jonathan. Thank you again for joining us for Sagas and Sass, and we will see you in about a month.
Good night.
Bye.